in prison, I realized 2 million of Hong Kong citizens joined the rally to urge Carrie Lam, the Beijing-appointed leader named Chief Executive Carrie Lam, must step down. At the same time, the evil law named extradition law amendment should withdraw as soon as possible, and that's what we asked for. Hong Kong is the place with only 7 million citizens, but more than 2 million people joined the rally to show that how we do not keep silence under the hardline suppression of President Xi Jinping.
Well, let's assume Carrie Lam does step down. Would that not just, increase pressure, on you and having a more hardline chief executive come in?
As we know that no matter who becomes the leader of Hong Kong, he or she is still the puppet of Chinese government, because the leader of Hong Kong is never elected by Hong Kong citizens, it's just appointed by the communist regime. But I hope people realize that last week, why 2 million people will come out to the street is because how Beijing and Hong Kong government endorse the police force in Hong Kong, hold the gun, shoot tourists, people with rubber bullets and tear gas. It is terrible and violates on basic human rights that we understand on. I hope people could realize that how we continue our fight in the short run, leaders should step down and withdraw the proposal. At the same time, we also, in the long run, will ask for free election. Hong Kong people deserve the right to freely elect the leader of our city.
You've been a long time at the forefront of campaigns against Beijing and leading calls for democracy. But why do you think that this particular issue has brought so many people out onto the streets?
As we know that how the extradition law amendment strongly erodes on Hong Kong basic human rights and rule of law and judicial independence. It's hard for us to imagine, but it might happen if the law passes, is Hong Kong citizens or any visitors around the world. If they exist in Hong Kong, they might get certain possibilities to be extradited from Hong Kong to mainland China, the place without fair trial. That's why I believe when it contradicts with the universal value that we believe in, people do not keep silence. What I mean is, 5 years ago during Umbrella Movement, 200,000 people come to the street to oppose Beijing hardline policy and ask for democracy. We can't achieve it, but we claim that we will be back. 5 years later, we are back with even stronger determination to protect the freedom of Hong Kong. Of course, under the Belt and Road policy and the uprising China model, a lot of people or leaders, especially in European countries, they might hope to make friends with China. But I hope they could realize that we are not afraid of Chinese government suppression on human rights and how they ignore the basic understanding on judicial independence.
Tell us something about, the time that you spent behind bars. What was it like for you, and why are you willing now again to risk your freedom?
I have experienced being locked up in the highest security prison for twice. It's hard for us to overcome the pressure in prison, especially when 24 hours they have CCTV to restrict your freedom and monitor on what you are doing. Especially political prisoners are not easy to handle this pressure. I hope people around the world can remind that. It's lucky that I left prison yesterday, 26 hours ago. But in Hong Kong, there are scholar, professor, social worker, lawmaker, and student activists being jailed. Those political prisoners are still physically exist in Hong Kong prison. The maximum jail sentence for Hong Kong activists is 7 years. I hope people around the world could realize that I am not the only political prisoners. There are more and more political prosecution might happen in the future. That's why when the government define our demonstration as riot is totally ridiculous and unreasonable. I hope the leader of Hong Kong must bear the responsibility.
Let's look forward, if we can, to 2047 when the one country, two system agreement expires. Aren't you afraid that any gains that you make in the short term might be swept away?
One country, two system that originally promised by Beijing already eroded to be one country, one and a half system. And I hope people could realize that when in 2047, I might be 51 years old. I hope my generation and those millennials could be the one determine our future instead of determine our future by Beijing. That's what we ask for and what we try to determine our own destiny.
For now, what's your next step?
As we know that Carrie Lam and the situation in Hong Kong already generate political burden for President Xi Jinping before the G20 summit and during the trade war negotiation. Perhaps President Trump having a meeting with President Xi Jinping later, soon, might discuss on what's happening in Hong Kong. So when Hong Kong leaders already generate burden for President Xi Jinping, I believe she, which means Carrie Lam, might need to make a decision to step down. At the same time, should fully withdraw the proposal instead of having certain suspension.